All right, we're going to talk about Austria and Russia and Great Britain. And I don't think I've done this for a while. It feels kind of strange. Anyway, so big five countries from 1850 to 1870 are still Austria, Prussia, Russia, France, and Great Britain. So we've talked about France and Napoleon III. We will talk about Prussia when we talk about the unification of Germany. And then today we'll do Austria, Russia, and Great Britain. All right, so what we know about Austria so far, we know that during the age of absolutism, they're in the 17th century, they're run by the Habsburgs, but they really failed to centralize because they had too many different ethnic groups. Among them, the Hungarian nobles, which were the Magyars, who were very powerful and prevented the Austrian Habsburg from having the same power they did when they were in control of the Holy Roman Empire. We know Austria was the center of conservatism with the Congress of Vienna in 1815 and Metternich, and in 1848 finally erupted in revolution, which was successfully put down because of the help of the Russians. When the Austrians failed to return the favor, we also know after the Crimean War that they were left with no friends. So here we are, if we pick them up in 1848, two really important things that we have to know from this time period. One is that the serfs were freed. So 1848, as a result of that revolution, Francis Joseph freed the serfs, and Metternich ran away. So those were kind of the two lasting things that came out of that 1848 revolution. The serfs didn't necessarily have a great life, but at least they were free and they could leave their land. Now, in the early 1850s, a guy named Alex von Bach, who was the Minister of Justice, tried to centralize, have a more autocratic government. The very conservative named the Catholic Church the state church, and the Catholic Church was in charge of education. They put military rulers in charge of Hungary to occupy Hungary to make sure they kept those Hungarian nobles under control. However, 1850s, 1859, Italy is going to start to unify, which Austria is in charge of. They're going to go to war, and the Austrians are going to be defeated by the Italians and the French. 1860, Francis Joseph's going to experiment a bit with decentralization, and then in 1866, the Austrians are going to get their butts kicked by Prussia. So from 1848 to 1867, when our second most important thing happened and they're forced to compromise, really nothing goes all that right for Austria. They really fail to completely centralize and get all those ethnic groups under control, and then their military continues to be pretty bad, and the defeat by the Prussians is the last straw. So in order to keep their empire together, Francis Joseph is forced to compromise, and it's called the Ausgleich, or however you say that, of 1867, or the Compromise of 1867. You do need to know that German word, that Ausgleich, Austrian-German word. You can't just think of it as the compromise. But what it'll do is it'll officially create a dual monarchy, so we'll call it Austria-Hungary now. And it will be different bureaucracy. So day-to-day running of the government, the Hungarian Magyars, or the Hungarian nobles, will get to run or rule themselves on a day-to-day basis. But Francis Joseph will hold it all together, and he will be in charge of the foreign policy, he'll be in charge of the army, and the Hungarians have to look to Francis Joseph as their emperor. So he is the guy that holds it together. As you see, he's the guy in the beard yesterday that said he had no friends in our PowerPoint, but this will officially separate Austria and Hungary. And not everyone was happy. Certainly the Magyars were thrilled, but the other ethnic groups, especially the Slavic groups, so people like the Czechoslovakians, the Serbs, the Polish, the Croats, the Slovenes, the Slovaks, those groups who are generally considered Slavic, they were very unhappy because now they had two people oppressing them. They had the Austrian Habsburgs oppressing them, and they had the Magyars oppressing them. So it wasn't that everyone was not happy, but it was the Magyars at least were happy, and the Habsburgs and Francis Joseph could hold on a little bit longer. All right, so two things in Austria. The serfs were freed, and the Compromise of 1867 created that dual monarchy with Hungary. All right, so now if we go to Russia, we talk about what we know about Russia. We know that Russia has been pretty autocratic, very little attempts at reform ever since they had the Decembrist revolt in 1825. After that, Russia didn't have a revolution in 1848 because Nicholas and Alexander II were so oppressive. So the Crimean War really prompts some changes in Russia. The Crimean War, if you remember, the Russians tried to take control of the declining Ottoman Empire, but the British and the French intervened and really beat Russia pretty badly in the Crimean War on the Crimean Peninsula, which is in Russia, to expose that they were really they were backwards. That as much as they had thought that they were kind of progressing, and the Russian monarchy had kind of tricked the people into thinking that they were a great power, they were not, and the British and the French easily kicked their butts. So Alexander II will attempt some limited reforms. In 1861, he will issue the Emancipation Edict, which will free the serfs in Russia, and Russia was the last place really to have serfdom. However, things were not great for the serfs. So how it worked was the government purchased the land from the landowners. So these big noble landowners owned these huge pieces of land, and they chose which part of their land they were going to give up to the government for purchase. So if you think about what kind of land you'd give up the crappiest land that doesn't grow much. And so all the landowners gave up their crappiest land, and then this is the land that the government sold to the serfs, and then they were expected to repay the state, or they had to face the mir, M-I-R, which is the village commune. They were the collection agency of the village. So the peasants were expected, or the newly freed peasants, were expected to pay back and repay the state for the land with the crappiest land possible in Russia. So it didn't really work that great. Really, the life got no better for the serfs. Second thing, but they were technically free in 1861. The second thing Alexander did was he instituted these zemstvos, which were local assemblies. They were in charge of levying taxes and had some, and building infrastructure. It was a degree of self-government, not totally top-down from Alexander, but it was a property-based system of voting, so the nobles retained much of their control in the local areas. Third thing was a judicial system, which attempted, and was really one of the only reforms that were successful, to give equality under the law in 1864. So all of those enlightened reforms that happened in the rest of Europe about 100 years ago are now in the 1860s. At least the equality under the law piece is happening in Russia, which just meant that a noble and a peasant were subject to the same laws, that the nobles didn't get out of it because they were noble status. So 3 things in Russia: serfs freed, these zemstvos, and then a newly acquired judicial system. The results, not so good. The reformers wanted more, so Alexander didn't do enough for people who truly wanted enlightened reform in Russia, and the conservatives were ticked because he did anything at all and made any reforms. So ultimately, Alexander II will be assassinated by this group called the People's Will, because everyone hated him. The other thing that's plaguing Russia is that nowhere in any of those reforms was there any industrial improvement. And so they're still hungry because they're using 100-year-old agricultural methods. There's no industrialization, which at this point in the 1860s is fairly advanced even in continental Europe. And you got all this social strife. So there's attempting to be a small middle class, but they don't have any power. And the serfs or the peasants, their life sucks, and the nobles still retain all their power. So Russia is still backwards. When Alexander II is assassinated, Alexander III, which is his son, comes to power. Afraid of himself being assassinated, returns to a very repressive regime with secret police and all the rest. So Alexander II, 3 reforms, then he's assassinated because he doesn't do enough, or he does something and everyone hates him, and then Alexander III is repressive because he doesn't want to end up like his dad. Okay, last one is... Okay, so a few points of clarification before we talk about the British. Liberal, radical, and conservative. Again, we have to think about that the 19th century view of liberal and conservative, not the 21st century view of liberal and conservative. Your liberals is like liberalism. It's your middle class, more laissez-faire in terms of politics, government intervention that will help the middle class. We're not talking about the working class. Wanted freedom of or equality of opportunity, not so much equality of condition, not everyone to be the same. Your Christian socialists, your Marxists, they were more the working class, wanted the central government to be strong so that they could equal out they could equal and give rights to the workers and make sure that the workers had more of an equal lifestyle than the middle class and the upper class, or had a more equal lifestyle. And then you have your conservatives or your Tories, which are your pro-aristocracy, old order, strict social hierarchy, state, Catholic religion. All right, so those are your ideologies that are continuing. Just don't forget that a conservative is not a 21st century conservative. Okay, so Queen Victoria will dominate this age, but she will not dominate politics, because we know from the 18th century, the Stuarts, the Hanoverians, that because they were from Hanover and they were German, that prime ministers had a lot of the political power. And with each passing century, your monarchs get more tea drinking and picture taking and a little less political. Now, Queen Victoria still had some political clout, but a lot of the work was done by the prime ministers. So Queen Victoria, or the Victorian age, she's going to rule from 1837 to 1901, 64 years, and she's going to be just like Queen Elizabeth, kind of the mother of Britain. Really emphasizes a strong sense of duty, moral responsibility, really emphasizes women staying at home and raising the kids, strong, moral kids, very, very patriotic, very British, but very strong on kind of the strict morals. Right, she just is responsible for the Great Exhibition of 1851, that Crystal Palace. She wants to display British wealth to the world, and definitely the lives of workers and the economy has improved during her reign in Great Britain, or at least the early part. There she is. There she is. There she is still. All right, she gets a little older. Don't we all? Okay, oh yeah, that's not a good picture. Look at that poof thing on her head. Okay, so the lives of the working class will improve. We've had some reform acts. Great Britain, like Russia, did not have any revolution in 1848, but certainly for different reasons. Remember when we drew that spaghetti pot on the board, or we called it whatever kind of pot you wanted? Okay, don't take that the wrong way. But anyway, the steam, that the British let the steam out of the pot so it didn't explode in revolution. Two reasons for that. One was that Reform Act of 1832, which gave more people the right to vote, so that rich middle class that was really in charge of organizing a lot of the debate was given the right to vote. And then they repealed the Corn Laws in 1846, which allowed the working class people to buy food. And so there wasn't that revolutionary fervor in 1848 in Great Britain like there was in other countries. So this time period from 1850 to 1870, the reforms will continue. You have the conservative Disraeli, who will be your first prime minister. And what you really need to know for him is that he extended suffrage. So he gave another 8% of people in Britain, so another 2.5 million people, the right to vote with his Reform Act of 1867. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, well, why would a conservative extend suffrage? Because they believe in old order. That does not make any sense at all. Well, it doesn't, you're right. But Disraeli, he was facing re-election in 1868, and what he thought was if he gave an extra 2.5 million people the right to vote, because he gave it to them, they would vote for him. Oh, he was so wrong. So let that be a lesson to all you politicians. That does not always work. So just because you give something to someone, they might not vote for you. So Disraeli does not get the vote, and he loses in 1868 to a guy named Gladstone, and Gladstone will get more liberal. He's a liberal, and so the administration in Great Britain will become more liberal. Still under Queen Victoria, but again, these guys are your prime ministers, Disraeli and Gladstone, who are ruling and doing a lot of the day-to-day ruling. So Gladstone is responsible for two things. One, he will open up government jobs to competition. So rather than money, and buying or status, it will be open to middle class, lower class, anyone who wants the job. Other things that he does, he'll issue secret ballots for elections, which is kind of a big deal when your ballot is secret, but it hadn't been secret up until this point. And then he will abolish the purchasing of military officers' spots. Last thing is he will pass the Education Act of 1870, which will require elementary school for all people regardless of economic status. So in Queen Victoria's age here, at least for now, we've got that strong sense of duty and moral responsibility. We have continued industrialization, and then politically we have the expansion of suffrage under the conservative Disraeli, and then 1868 new elections brings Gladstone's liberal administration, and he makes some liberal reforms with education and ballots and competition for everyone. Oh, there she is. All right, so that is it for today. I came in just 30 seconds shy, good for me, and we might do another one or we might wait till next week. Have a good one.